So here it is, video number 2, student loan debt. A topic I've seen people post about endlessly on social media. Everything from rugged individualist arguments saying that if you can't declare bankruptcy on student loan debt, then maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't have taken it out in the first place. All the way to people blaming society for all their problems, saying it's capitalism's fault.
Everything is society's fault, and we as individuals never need to take responsibility for anything.
No.
They have student loan debt, and that they can't get a job in their field. While I would love to pick these apart, and believe me, I would, there seems to be something lacking in today's society. Everything is bite-sized and completely lacking in nuance. For example, there seems to be this overarching stereotype that people who have tons of student loans are millennials, drowning in debt, not starting families, not opening businesses, depressed, anxious, suicidal, unemployed, who got a degree in gender studies, and is now some radical socialist. Most people know what I'm already talking about. You probably have one in your friend group. But if you don't, just imagine a more pretentious version of.
You know, when President Lincoln abolished slavery, it was not a popular opinion. God, I just hate slavery so much.
Slavery's the worst.
If I could go back in time and undo slavery, I would. I hate it.
You've never experienced oppression in your entire life. Neither have I. You're a white male.
And this is the image that comes to mind in most people's heads when they think of a college student drowning in debt. And it's not exactly true. And that's kind of what I'm getting at when I say we lack nuance in today's society. While that stereotype might have some truth to it, and I mean, I've seen it before on college, it doesn't paint the whole picture. And for that reason, we're going to dive into the economics and data of it. You've heard headlines like there's over $1.7 trillion in student loan debt that keeps piling up. And I know that might sound like a scary number, but our national debt is also over 25 trillion. So it's kind of hard to gauge if 1.7 trillion is even a lot of money when we're dealing with such large numbers. So then it kind of begs the question, how bad is the situation? So before we get into the numbers, there's a small caveat I need to make. It was very difficult to dig up information for 2020 regarding student loan debt, since there's still a lot of data to process through since the whole pandemic sent a sledgehammer through the whole economy. A lot of the numbers I'm going to give are either from 2019 and some are from 2020. It's safe to say, though, a lot of these numbers likely have gone worse since the start of the pandemic. Currently, 69% of college students have taken out student loans, and the amount they borrow has more than tripled since the 1960s. As for the cost of college, we already know it's bad, so let's tackle the issue first. There are 45 million borrowers who collectively owe nearly 1.7 trillion in student loan debt in the US. Student loan debt is now the second highest consumer debt category, behind only mortgage debt, and higher than both credit card debt and auto loans. The amount of student loan debt someone will carry averages at $37,584. From 1969 to 2019, we all know the cost of college has exploded. That much is self-evident. But I decided to do a little research myself on government websites to see for myself exactly how much it has gone up. And keep in mind, these numbers are all adjusted for inflation because $1 in 1969 isn't the same as $1 in 2019. The only good news about tuition is that it went down during the pandemic. From what I could Google, it looks like it dropped about 5% points-ish, give or take. But anyway, here's the graph of the average undergraduate tuition and fees charged for full-time students in degree-granting post-secondary institutions. That's literally what it says on the website that I used. I have the data that I used to make this graph in the description. Keep in mind, this is just for tuition and fees, not room and board. So, of course, I felt the need to make my own graph, and the most ironic thing about this graph is that public universities have actually gone up the most, seeing a 3.5-fold increase since 1969, with private universities only seeing a 3.1-fold increase. And these are all inflation adjusted, because it drives me up a wall whenever I pull data from the 1960s and they don't adjust it for inflation. I was like, okay, it was definitely cheaper in the 1960s, but you can make it look like it was astoundingly cheaper if not adjusted for inflation. So that's actually what it looks like if the dollar maintained the exact same value. Now, another interesting way to split it is by generation, starting with baby boomers. Well, first off, let's disprove one stereotype. Millennials don't carry the majority of student loan debt. It's
baby boomers.
While there might be this idea going around that baby boomers have it easy and paid a fraction of what we pay today for tuition, after doing some research, they actually owed 33% more debt in 2020 than 2019. But there is a catch. This is due in large part to Parents Plus loans secured for children and grandchildren. So basically, to make a long story short, they're paying for their kids' educations. People in their 50s and 60s should be preparing for retirement, but this is the first generation taking on debt of up to $100,000 to support one or more kids going through college. This can be a little tricky because essentially the boomers are more or less co-signing loans for their kids and grandkids. So it is really, is it really the debt of the boomers, or is the debt just Gen X or millennial debt? 91% of undergraduate and 62% of graduate private loans were co-signed by someone else during the 2019-2020 academic year. And while boomers hold a majority of the debt, it spreads out over many people, making the per-person debt lower. It's kind of like 100 boomers owning $200 of debt that breaks out to be $2 per boomer. But if we look at Gen X, there could be 50 Gen Xers owing $150, which is less than the $200 boomers owe, but it also comes out to be $3 per person. This is important because Gen X, people between the ages of 39 and 54, actually have the most student loan debt of any generation, with an average of $39,584 per borrower. Millennials now, 43% of millennials have student loan debt, and because the amount of debt millennials owe is in flux due to a good amount of millennials still being in school, we currently know that the typical millennial owes about $30,000-ish and growing. Okay, well, how about the breakdown between men and women? Does it affect one more than the other? Well, most people don't know, but women by pretty substantial margin outnumber men in colleges. Since the late 1970s, actually, there have been more women in college than men, and the number continues to grow. And because women outnumber men in college these days and are more likely to pursue a graduate degree, they are the ones who end up with a bigger loan balance. In fact, 42% of women have more than $30,000 in student loan debt compared to only 27% of men. I put a link in the description for the data I used to get those numbers. And if we go farther and break this down along income, the data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances also show that upper income households account for the bulk of monthly out-of-pocket payments for student loan debt. The highest income, 40% of American households, those with incomes above $74,000, owe almost 60% of outstanding education debt and make almost 3/4 of the payments. The lowest income 40% of households, however, hold just 20% of the debt and account for 10% of the payments. So in other words, even the upper class has been feeling the financial squeeze of the rising cost of tuition. Currently, it's causing young adults to put off having kids, moving out, buying a home, a car, opening a business, getting better health care. It's causing an increase in depression, anxiety, and suicide. So just how many people are in the red, and how far in the red are they? For example, what degree even is the most likely to default on student loan debt? Let's start there. So at a rate of 26.33%, arts and humanities majors who attended school are the most likely to default on their student loan debt. So there's some truth to the whole gender study, history study, religion, performing arts, things of that nature, having a bleak future, oftentimes finding themselves underemployed or unemployed. Most of this can kind of be boiled down to, since they are required to employ themselves and push products and services out to the masses, there isn't exactly a gender studies or a religious studies factory that opens up. These jobs require you to just go out there and get people to buy what you're making. So on to the next group. So on average, about 42.8% of borrowers who are in default owe between $20,000 and $40,000. And then 77.6% of borrowers owe $40,000 or less in defaulted student loans. For many, the payments are proving unmanageable. By 2023, nearly 40% of borrowers are expected to default on their student loans. Currently, 250,000 borrowers default on their student loans each quarter, with an additional 20,000 to 30,000 who defaulted on their student loans again after having recovered. Surprisingly, those borrowers with a smaller amount of student loan debt had a higher likelihood of default. 32% of borrowers with a balance of $5,000 or less defaulted at least once within 4 years, compared to 15% of borrowers who had borrowed more than $35,000. Well, there is a little bit of a silver lining to all this, because defaults were halted as part of pandemic relief measures. Prior to the pandemic, about 11.1% of student loans were 90 days or more delinquent, or were just in default altogether. Federal student loans are considered to be in default once a borrower goes 270 days without making a payment. But as soon as you reach default status, you face some pretty bad repercussions. For one thing, your credit score is pretty much guaranteed to tank, and that's a huge problem if you want to borrow money in the form of a personal loan, auto loan, or credit card. And in some industries, poor credit can actually prevent you from getting a job. So how do you think that plays a part with millennials not buying houses or being kind of economically stunted, if you will? I'm not even a millennial myself, but the more and more research I did on this, I was just like, wow. There's some merit to the argument that millennials really did get it bad. Anyway, not to go on that tangent, but your credit score your credit score implications aside, defaulting on student loans can also result in a scenario where some of your wages are garnished. And needless to say, if you're already struggling financially, that'll only make your situation tenfold worse. As such, it pays to do everything in your power to avoid defaulting on your student loans, because your finances can't afford to take that kind of hit. I know people personally who literally just like payday came around the corner, they went to go check their bank account, and the IRS had taken pretty much their whole paycheck. It's a thing. It happens. It's real. Defaulting on student loans is really ugly, and you really, really want to avoid it. Anyway, by the time a person's student loans fall into default, they will see their credit score tank around 60 points to an average of around 550, which is considered very poor by rating company Experian. Borrowers who stay current, on the other hand, have scores on average in the high 600s. A low credit score can force people to pay higher interest rates, delay buying a house, and even have to worry about being disqualified from certain jobs. And on top of that, believe it or not, most people who have student loans have already technically paid off the loan. They're just stuck paying the interest. And if they fall behind, the interest goes up, exacerbating the whole issue. The government also has extraordinary collection powers with federal loans, since they're one of the only debts unable to be discharged in bankruptcy. Keep that in mind. I think I said it earlier in the video. You cannot go bankrupt on student loans. Well, technically you can, and it's near impossible. It's like 0.01 or 0.001% of people successfully declare bankruptcy. Okay, so one little video update is, now that Biden's president, some things have changed. There currently is a new head of Department of Education, so the numbers have also changed. Currently, it's about 4 out of 10 Americans who file for bankruptcy are able to have their student loans somewhat discharged. If you're successful, your outstanding student loan debt may be partially or fully discharged. However, it doesn't always work because you would need to qualify under what's called undue hardship. Feel free to Google exactly what that entails. It's quite a lot, and I don't have the time to go over it in this video. And when Trump was in office, I'll put a little link to this in the description. Betsy De'Vos, I don't know what her problem is, but she essentially did everything in her power to not forgive a single student loan. I thought about making a separate video about this, but I'll just link a link in the description. It's pretty god-awful what she did. She had to be basically put in a corner by federal judges and forced to forgive some of these student loans. You essentially had to have like AIDS super cancer, your whole family had to be murdered in order for Betsy to even maybe consider the fact that maybe you needed some sort of student loan relief. Like, you had to be in an unbelievably bad spot for them to consider it. If you're interested in reading into it, Betsy DeVos was our head of Department of Education under Trump. There were some pretty god-awful things she did regarding just absolutely being savage to people who had student loans. It's pretty disgusting. I left the link in the description if you want to check out an article about all the messed up stuff she did as the head of the Department of Education. In addition, some states can even suspend or revoke state-issued professional licenses, and some states can suspend a driver's license because of student loan debt. To make matters worse, defaulting on your student loans also increases the total balance, likely due to collection fees and the accumulation of more and more interest. As I mentioned earlier, if you missed a payment, your interest rate goes up, exacerbating the whole issue of making you more able to pay off your student loan debts in the first place. So after the default, the Urban Institute found a student loan borrower can see their balance balloon by around 10%. So it kind of just makes the whole thing significantly worse. The CARES Act, however, allows people to dip into their 401k and use that money to pay off debt without a penalty. Usually, if you dipped into your 401k early, there would be a pretty strict penalty, but not this time around. Aside from generations and occupations, the data also shows many individuals are delaying contributing to their retirement or taking out loans against their 401k. That's a huge deal. An action that is literally borrowing against one's future to pay for the past. Of note, the number of people who have an outstanding loan against their 401k is up significantly, from 13.9% in 2019 to 23% in 2020, which is attributable in part to the changes to retirement withdrawals enacted in April as a result of the CARES Act. This increase is a huge concern, as these loans can have a dramatic negative impact on 401k balances, particularly among young retirement savers who have a long time horizon and greater potential in their early years to save more. So, student loan debt is literally destroying the retirement potential of younger people who have to essentially more or less use their 401k as collateral to basically pay off their student loan debts, which just keep ballooning more and more and more anytime. And think about it, when this pandemic first happened, before any relief occurred, do you think anybody missed maybe one payment on their student loan debt and saw their interest rate go up? It's almost an inexplicable amount of people have. And the same thing happened in 2009 with the recession. Before any relief came, many were months behind because they were unemployed during that whole time period. It's just, this whole thing's bad. It's really bad. Since 2020 was kind of an economic sledgehammer, it was a little difficult to find the exact information on how much debt was owed in 2020. But here's what I could find. The numbers are a little different depending where you look, and I did put every website I used to create this video in the description, so feel free to look through it. Anyway, the average millennial, from what I could find in 2020, a millennial graduate owed about $52,000 on their student loans. The average Gen X borrower owed $69,000, but even more shocking is the fact that baby boomers owed on average $75,000. It's bad. Okay, and that's it for part 1 of my student loan video. It took me a long time to get this video out, mostly because procrastination and needing more free time. Anyway, I have that free time now, so videos will be coming out more frequently. There's a few hiccups with Adobe, trying to figure it all out, trying to decide if I should use Storyblocks or Envato, and basically just trying to get the gist of how this whole YouTube thing works. So, I mean, now with more free time on my hands, there'll definitely be more videos coming out. I have some in the works already. I hope to get them out hopefully weekly. I have to make them all myself, start to finish. I make my music and everything, so I apologize if there's a long time between videos, but as things go on and I get the hang of it, the efficiency should go up.